for the people joining this, Conan had interviewed me on his lovely podcast thing that he's been doing a long time, and I'm going to ask you questions about that.
Sure.
Because you're the guy that gave me the idea of doing this, so I have to give props. But also, that was at the start of this whole thing, and that seems like it was a long time ago, but it was a year and about a year ago. Well, something like a year, I guess. Whatever.
Yeah, but, just a year ago. I think that's right. I think it was. I mean, it was right near the beginning of COVID. I remember distinctly because I definitely stepped Protonic Reversal episodes up into high gear.
And I asked you about that, and you said, well, the reason I'm doing so much of this stuff right now is because I have the time to do it, obviously, because everything has been put on hold more or less, and you have your music career and all that stuff, and you couldn't do anything for a long time, so you're just so I can stay kind of sane as this whole thing unfolds, to give myself something to do. I'm just going to pour it on, and you've done a shitload of these these interviews, but I don't know exactly how long you've been doing this. When did you decide to? We'll get into musical end of things first, but since this is what you've done very intensely for the last year during all this stuff, what gave you the idea for you to do this in the first place?
Yeah, so I would say about a year ago, it's stepped up, and even it's not like I was bad before. Like I'm confident in my skills, but I think there was something about the time and sort of meeting the moment that I think the show got better, got like a little deeper, and maybe because I had no other distractions of literally any kind other than staring at the walls. Who knows? But it's interesting you asked, Brian, because I realized that the 7-year anniversary of Protonic Reversal starting is later in April. So that'll be 7 years, 250 episodes. Almost exactly, which I didn't plan out that way at all. and the idea originally of starting it was just because it's just like starting a band, right? Like you want to make the kind of music that you want to hear, but can't, that isn't around. I wanted to make the kind of show that I wanted to listen to, that that's what it comes down to.
Maybe even talking to the kind of people that you've talked to some names that we all know, but you've also talked to a lot of people that you've admired, but they may not be on the tip of everybody's tongue, so to speak. But you talk to a lot of people, for sure.
Not exactly names, for sure. Well, because the idea is, like, I'm coming from a certain place and a certain ethos. Like I've played music almost my entire adult life, toured, made records, never stopped. On whatever small level that is. And so because of that, I come from I have a certain lived experience. But I'm also a huge fan of the things I'm a huge fan of. And I never have anybody on the show if I'm not a fan of what they do. Now, they could be like big and famous. They could be somebody nobody's ever heard of. But for me, that's what makes the show good. That's what makes the show interesting, is that, like, I'm acutely interested in the person I'm having on. And having those kinds of talks, and it's not that there aren't other good shows that are out there, but I don't feel like there's any specific show that does what Protonic Reversal does. And I'm happy anyone else gets anything out of it at all, frankly, but I'm basically doing it for me, and especially when COVID started, because I think I told you, it was just sort of like, felt like the shipwrecked had already happened, and I was afloat in the ocean, and Protonic was my driftwood, pretty much, or fuselage, whatever.
Yeah, I think of you when I think of people that do that stuff, and I think of Damien from Fucked Up.
Oh yeah.
Turned out a punk show, and he gets pretty interesting people too,
and he's coming from the lived experience of being someone that plays in a touring rock band, and then has lived the life as well, and that's a good. And that show didn't exist when I started Protonic Reversal, right? Like there's a bunch of shows that didn't exist, including some of the more famous ones in some people's eyes, and that's fine. I'm not someone that like looks at it like a competition or anything. It's like more the merrier, right? If it's good, it's good.
I don't want to compete with Nikki Sixx either, so I know what you're talking about. I mean, he might have a bigger pull than me at this point, but it's like, well, you did play bass on Too Fast for Love, and that's like the only good thing you ever did, and you wrote that stuff, so there's plenty of room for Nikki Sixx as well as us. So
did you? I guess I'm going to do a sidebar like immediately. Did you hear about the story with Nikki Sixx? Those guys were huge Sweet fans. Do you know this story? That
let me know.
Huge. Brian Connolly is a huge. Nikki Sixx is a huge Sweet fan, so he wrote like letters to Brian Connolly. Hey man, here's my band. We really love you guys. We really love it if you could take a listen, and tell me what you think. And he kept writing him, and then Brian Connolly eventually wrote back and was like, "It's shit, mate. It's no good."
Really? Oh,
yeah. He didn't care for it. Brian Connolly didn't from Sweet did not care for that tape of Motley Crue. So he was like, he got him on the phone is what it was, and he was like, "Well, fuck you, man." That was like the Nikki Sixx response.
Really?
Yeah. I think it's in that book of theirs that somebody gave to me for a birthday present years ago. The Motley Crue book,
The Dirt.
Yeah, and I have limited patience for sort of tales of rock and roll excess that sort of glorify the partying aspects. I get on you. I get it. It's just not my steez, but it was a great birthday gift. I never would have sought it out on my own. Right. But that's on the early chapters. And I'm probably one of the only people that ever read that book as a much bigger Sweet fan than a Motley Crue fan. So I enjoyed that story.
Well, now you're talking to two people. Now you're talking.
You might be the one, yeah.
I'm a bigger fan of Sweet than Motley Crue. So, well, no, I didn't know that story. Well, Tommy Lee, did I tell you the story of? I'm not going to turn this back on me too much, but since you brought up Nikki Sixx, did I ever tell you the story of Tommy Lee coming to my high school to pick up a T-shirt that I drew of him?
No.
Okay, I'll make this really quick because this isn't about me, but this is pretty funny, and you brought it up. I grew up in Los Angeles, and in 1983, I might have still been in high school, and Motley Crue were like a big local band, like a big local meaning Los Angeles. I lived in Simi Valley, which is in Ventura County, which is like 40 miles, whatever. Anyway, I was friends with Tommy Lee's coke dealer, but I didn't know he was a coke dealer until decades later. He was just this weird guy with a mustache that seemed like he was 70 years old, but he was probably 25 years old. I was in high school still.
He's from 15 years younger than we are now. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we're way older than that now. But anyway, he ran a pirate radio station. It's for some reason I drew something, and I don't even know how I met this guy. But he was friends with Tommy Lee, and he operated a pirate radio station in Simi Valley, California. So one day he was like, "Hey, do you want to come by here and meet Tommy Lee?" So I did. I rode my bike down there. He was sitting in the garage, and I gave him. I just was like, "Hey, man," and I made him sign my shoe, and then he gave me a rated T-shirt, and he said, "Can you draw us on this, and then I'll come to your high school tomorrow and pick it up."
Oh wow!
And I'm like, "You're gonna come to my?" And he did. He gave me the T-shirt. I went home. I stretched it over a board. I drew with a Sharpie, Motley Crue, Too Fast for Love. And him and the coke dealer friend came to my high school during lunchtime, and they were just swaggering across the campus. And the coke dealer guy had no shirt on. And they really stood out. And I gave him the T-shirt by the heavy metal tree. There was a heavy metal tree in my high school. And I was big shit for maybe one second. But anyway.
Oh, yeah, that's
yeah. So where exactly what's your origin story as far as like where were you born in the Bay Area? Because that's where you operate. No. Is that where you're from?
So I live in Milwaukee now. I say that I'm from Oakland. I lived there for 22 years of my life, but I moved to Oakland when I was 17. I actually grew up in a town called Modesto in the Central Valley of California.
Oh, man. What was that like?
Terrible. Or rather great in the fact that it gives you plenty to rebel against. It was a land of mundane intolerance, racism, sexism, small-mindedness. and it gave me plenty to define myself against. So I got out literally as soon as I could.
That's Central California. That's the San Joaquin Valley.
Yeah, and it's the same. So it's closer in feel, I would say, to something like Kansas and Nebraska than it is to like San Francisco or Los Angeles. And again, like it helped kind of set me on my path that I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be around these people who, weren't interested in the same kinds of things I were. And rather than, turn into an aspiring serial killer or something, I decided that the move would be to go where the stuff I liked was, which was in the Bay Area. And you got to remember, this is pre-internet times too. Like this is the internet as we know it.
So yeah. What's the time period we're talking about as far as you growing up there and then you getting out? Like there was no culture or no cool person that like set you on your path, or did you read fanzines or any of that stuff?
Oh yeah. So my friend and I made a couple zines and comic books actually as well. We had a whole like comic book expanded universe of our silliness. We even had a public access TV show that they somehow let air that was in retrospect, when I stop and think about it, was actually kind of like ahead of its time, but like done with public access, no production values, complete overexcited amateurs with, lots of time on their hands.
It sounds wonderful. Do you have any of those around? Do you still have copies?
I don't have any of the tapes anymore, and it breaks my heart because we had bits like a Natman and Blobin, which was a Batman and Robin parody. But because of our limited budget, they never got out of the Nat Cave, and they just sort of like bickered amongst themselves, like the Odd Couple, about like just mundane issues about like, you're supposed to change the oil on the Natmobile. What? I thought you were. Well, we can't go now. Risk blowing the tranny, whatever. Like the point was they never left the cave, and it was just like a really crappy Michael Keaton Batman mask. The one guy, like the costumes were terrible, but it was, and I come from hippie parents, and they were very big into drugs and doing drugs, and I was not, because of it. For me, like it was not a rebellious act to go, smoke pot and do this and that and the other, but I knew what stoners liked. so I kind of leaned into that for my part of that show, which was collaborative. And like we made basically what I think if the tapes had kept around would at least be like, something of interest on YouTube. Hey, check out this weird stuff. But that's how I had to express my creativity, because me and my friend Clay, who was the guy that kind of started me on my path to playing music, he literally just showed up at my door one day and said, "Hey, I bought a bass. You need to buy a guitar so we can be a band." And I said, "Okay." And I went and got a guitar, and like, before I only pretty much just read comic books and like Stephen King and like, you paid attention to sci-fi and stuff like that. But I listened to music all the time. Like at the time, that's what I was getting, like Nirvana, Melvins, Butthole Surfers, Jesus Lizard a little later, Sonic Youth, like all that stuff. Like I was getting into that, and like kind of my growth progression towards that music was almost exponential, which is very... It's important to note, this is before you could just push a button and get any of this stuff, right? You had to look for it, and there wasn't a record store in Modesto, like at all.
I've been to Modesto before. It was a beautiful place. There wasn't a cultural hub in like not even a record store. Man.
No, so I will say this: Modesto is like one of those towns that like kind of catches up to where everyone else is 10 years later, right? And so they may have one now. I don't know. There wasn't anything when I lived there. And in fact, if you wanted to even like get a good record or to, whatever, anything, you wanted to see a good show even, like you pretty much had to go to the Bay Area. So we were always driving up to Oakland, San Francisco, and seeing shows, buying punk rock t-shirts and like, then like coming back and then just, feeling like a virus that the body is trying to expunge upon.
So you don't look back and think, well, there was at least this one nice part of my upbringing in Modesto. There isn't one thing that you can look back on and go, that was okay. Because go ahead. A little bit.
Well, I think I did say that, and let me sort of clarify, is that it gave me plenty to rebel against and help define my personality, which is to say that I'm not someone that sits around waiting for things to happen or waiting for other people to organize things for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of where that came from is because there nominally wasn't any organizational infrastructure for the stuff I like. There was nothing. There was just, now some people might try to split hairs or something with that, but really there was nothing. Let's be clear. I was there. There was nothing. And it helped me develop my personality to be someone that tries to create order from chaos, which has a lot to do with my upbringing, but also more interested in creating things and tearing things down. And, you know, they weren't any good, but my friend Clay and we wrote a bunch of songs. You know, we played in the basement. We had these long lists of like band names and album names and things and all the stuff that we were going to do. And but it was all talk because we were just like, we had all the ambition, but didn't have the ability to see it through. In fact, for the longest time, it was very difficult for us to even get like a decent drummer. So it was like one of those things where putting the cart before the horse, put it bluntly, but like we spent so much like that sort of dreaming about like what we would do when we are able to go be a band and do stuff. That's kind of what kept going. And which is funny now because, you know, it's a huge part of my life. It just seemed like such a, like, we didn't know how do you do this? Well, I don't know. Let's just keep playing music and see. And Clay, my friend, the guy who showed up at the door with the bass and got me playing guitar, we had very different life paths. Let's put it that way. And he died in, I guess it was 2015. And he's on the cover of the first Conan Neutron, The Secret Friends record, which is a David Yao stylized cover of these band photos that we took that our friend Lisa took in high school. And it's just like us being goobers, like trying to be like the bands that we liked and whatever. But and in retrospect, they're adorable. But at the time, it's like, oh, this is serious business. Like this, because we knew how to do that. You know, what we didn't know was find a drummer that was like on board with our vision. We didn't know that at all. And that wouldn't happen until much later and only with me. But after he died, unfortunately at an early age, that's a tragic story. I ended up having that be the album cover just because it was like, well, music didn't work out for him and it wasn't his path. He really didn't succeed at any of the wildly ambitious things that he wanted to do. And he kind of fell to his own vices and his own darkness, really. But he got to be on a record cover eventually.
You strike me as somebody that is not a stranger to either comedy records or enjoying a good a good television show dedicated to comedy. Did you grow up having that being an influence?
Oh yeah, I mean,
what kind of stuff? Because like you strike me as somebody that this is a guy that must have spent some time with some comedy as an important thing in that person's life. What kind of stuff did you gravitate toward?
This guy is someone that could quote a good deal of comedy skits at me. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that shows like Kids in the Hall and The Young Ones were just as much as influence on us as like, Sonic Youth or Melvins or anything along those lines. Like it was huge. And that's one of the reasons why, and I want to be clear that everything that we did like in high school is all just white knuckle incompetence, right? Like, I mean, just not knowing anything, figuring out as we went. And I would go ahead and say that if you were to take a snapshot of those times, you would probably say like, oh, the comic book thing will be better for them, or this TV show thing will be better for them. You probably wouldn't have said the music, having actually heard the music. Like it was pretty, it wasn't terrible per se, but there was just sort of like, yeah, that's there. Okay. So you got to get there. You got to spend those years kind of getting there. Some people are just fantastic out of the gate. And I will say that my first real band was Replicator, which is the band that to this day a lot of people still know me from. And that was 8 active years of playing, touring, and making records. And that was basically my first real band. Because I'm not stuff I did in high school. It's like, we called ourselves temporarily out of service. We called ourselves the worst. We never got out of the garage. It's just like, that's just dicking around to me. Until you're playing shows or recording music, it's just dicking around to me, for my own person. What was the question? Oh, comedy. So comedy, Dr. Demento was actually a huge thing for me.
Dr. Demento for me was like what I was listening to before I heard punk rock.
Same.
And I talked to a lot of people, and almost all of them say the exact same thing. If they ended up being the kind of person that was into just weird countercultural music or whatever you want to call it, punk rock, whatever, almost 9 times out of 10, they were listening to Dr. Demento before they went to this other direction, almost across the board. So you're like, it's like the most common story. I guess maybe that's just where weirdos where they start off. They start off listening to Dr. Demento and Spike Jones and Cheech and Chong and whatever, and then Dr. Demento plays the Ramones on his show for the first time, and you're like, whoa, what's that? And he even played the world's shortest. He had like a little section where he played the world's shortest songs, and he played a Jodie Foster's Army song, like right when their first single came out.
Nice.
Ago. And that literally was what directed me toward Ronnie Bingenheimer, who you know about.
Oh, of course. Oh, yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
Dr. Demento, I think a lot of like weird music and punk rock or post-punk or whatever probably owes an unsaid debt to the Dr. Demento show. And I wonder if he is even aware of that.
I wonder. I think he's still around too. But I think, yeah. Was it? It must have been very exciting to like move to a new place and like start over and try to figure out what to do or whatever. What were those early years in the Bay Area like climate wise? As far as did you find what you were looking for? The inspiration? I'm sure you must have known about it way before you ever moved up there. Obviously.
Oh yeah. So. For sure, but there's a difference between knowing something from afar and kind of being in it. So I worked at the either 4th or 5th coolest record store in Berkeley out of 4, which was Tower Records. Right. And that just fast tracked my musical evolution, because that's how I found out about bands, like the Birthday Party and like the Stooges and like also stuff like Miles Davis and like Hank Williams Sr. and like kind of had nothing to do other than earn minimum wage at a relatively demeaning job and just expand my musical horizon, listening to like all of this cool stuff. And that was like mind blowing to me, because it was sort of like I was already on my path from what I picked up in high school, because I grew up, like I said, I had hippie parents, but they were musical parents. Like they listened to like Black Sabbath. They listened to Neil Young. They listened to.
How do you rebel? You just don't. You don't get high.
Right. I don't get high, and it's sort of like my dad played me Back in Black the day it came out and was like doing like like kung fu moves in the living room.
Oh, that's just insane. That's like a Cheap Trick song.
Yeah. So it was like, and I loved all that stuff. I totally dug it, but it never. The first stuff that hit me that kind of felt like, oh, this is for me, was like when Nirvana hit, and like you had like all the other bands that kind of came out that came to people's attention like around that time. Sure. In Toyland and like Buttle Servers were a big one for me that I'll never revise history and say that they're not. Like all of these bands, and a little later the Jesus Lizard, like Melvins, like that's why I was like, oh, this is for me. This is for me. This is like not the same. As much as I love Black Sabbath, as much as I love Neil Young, much as I love Led Zeppelin, this is like my stuff right here.
Yeah, it's more your. Yeah.
So then when I got to work at the record store, I not only got to like dig deeper on that stuff and like get into the whole like 90s weird rock sort of like small window where the weirdos were let in, but also kind of like backtracked and found all this awesome like post-punk stuff. I got really into like Wire and Gang of Four. Like I said, the Birthday Party is like one of my favorites of all time, as you well know. Yeah. And that was all just having the ability to like listen to stuff for free, which now anybody can do at any time. which I mean, it's great, but it's like it single-handedly changed the development of people's musical habits by having everything instantly available. I did not have that option.
Yeah, or like the idea of having to like actually buy something based on what the package or the cover looked like, and then and like do you find that when you talk about these concepts now to people that are younger than us that they just can't believe? I don't want to get into the whole, well, back in my day, but do you find that there's like this disconnect because a lot of people just didn't grow up with that kind of thing, and you forget how old you are or that you went through that, and you just assume that's a common experience for most people? Is there like some disconnect when you talk to some people, or you don't even have to like name names, of course, but even on your show, can you pick up on some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly apparent, and like I try not to lean too much into it, other than to provide context, because there are younger listeners. Like, it isn't just a bunch of old men listening to old men stuff. You know what I mean? So because of that, like I will sometimes just present that context, and it's not meant to be like, you know, I still just remember being at the tail end of Gen X and all, like just like the level of just boomer, like, you know, disdain of, you know, towards like, oh, so lazy and entitled, which is like they're doing the same stuff for like these new group of kids, right? It's like, wow, okay, this is the exact same set of criteria. But I don't ever want to, I don't want to come at it from a cynical place. I think it's great that you could like, you know, jump on the internet and like find out about like Radio Birdman and like get super into Radio Birdman, or like, you know, like, hey, I've just now processed the entire Gang of Four discography. Sure drops off after the first couple records, you know, like that's up. I just didn't have that same experience. And what I had from that was working at the record store. And it was like maybe the only good thing about working at a record store, and the fact that it paid my, you know, $525 a month, like 1-bedroom apartment in Oakland, which is like, you wouldn't get an outhouse now for that amount of money.
Sure.
But yeah, that was a huge part of my development. And then like also being in the thick of it, I was able to see shows. I was able to see these bands that like I really wanted to see, and meet people, meet like-minded people, and just it kind of set me on my course. The whole apartment was like a live-in art project. We had like just like freaking, you know, movie posters, because Clay worked at the video store and I worked at the record store. So between the two of us, anytime there was like free swag, it was like, oh, cool, Taxi Driver poster over there. Oh, cool. Yeah. Sonic Youth poster over there. Like just the whole, and like, I mean the ceiling too, also. Like, hey, Fangoria, like Xeroxes all over the place. And like, yeah, some of those probably wouldn't pass the woke test now, frankly. But, you know, you can probably picture it in the fact that it was just a live-in art project. And we were just so excited about the freedom of living on our own.
Oh, and yeah. Everything's great. That's the other thing. Everything, like, everything you do when you're a young person and you're excited and you're discovering all this cool stuff, cool music, cool culture, finding like-minded people, it's really exciting in a way that's hard to really express. It's really hard to put into words, like how exciting it is or was or still is and what it means. And that a lot of times all the music you discovered, I'll just speak for me. You don't have to agree, but like, well, yeah. I mean, because maybe you have another take, but like all the stuff I ended up really liking and enjoying, it was like musically, it was like a soundtrack for me trying to get my own creativity going, and you know, and that included mainly drawing and stuff like that. And I literally do the same thing now at my age that I did when I was in high school, which is sitting around listening to music that makes me excited and drawing stuff because I'm excited to draw stuff. And it's like a discovering Miles Davis and Black Flag, you know, through all the years, all the different things to discover. It was just like a soundtrack of just creativity and just being excited about doing something, regardless of what you think about it now, looking back, or even a month ago, doing something is still way better than doing nothing, you know? And it's like you, I have to keep doing something. And it was all like a soundtrack, you know, like discovering all that stuff, seeing all those bands. It was great in a way I can't really put into words. Well, I'm trying to get the the time frame right. So you
Oh yeah.
you spend a lot of time playing in the Bay Area, but like, see, because like I associate you with the Bay Area, and then like when I actually did meet you, it was in Wisconsin, and I was like, does he have to? Did you just move? How long ago was it when you moved out there? And why did you move out there to begin with?
Yeah. Okay. So moved out to Milwaukee in summer of 2017. It's not a very interesting story. It's just for cost of living. The Bay Area has become really expensive. I mean, I didn't leave the Bay Area because I hate the Bay Area. It's just become untenable with life goals of what wanted to do that. And since I was in a situation where I didn't have a traditional band where the same people all play in the same room every week,
you just grab people that you could find for whatever the period of time it is, and you obviously continue that when you relocated, I would imagine.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess to understand that better, you'd have to understand that and this is skipping way ahead, but the Indian in my band before Secret Friends, like we did the we did the thing that a band does where they're like, I call it the trying to do bring someone else into the marriage kind of situation of like, oh, we're gonna take a break here. And knowing full well that I'm like, yeah, this is probably hosed. And then we came back like it probably was. And the reason why is because it was like those guys wanted to do more writing in the room. I was kind of getting more into demo and stuff and getting better. And we were just going opposite directions with it. It's fine. That is the band to this day that nobody really cares about. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, but like it was my least popular band. Right. And it never, here's a better way to put it. It never found its proper audience, as many bands don't. And it's not that it was bad. It just never found its audience.
I'm the poster boy for that with my...
Yeah. Common story, right?
It's very common. Sometimes you just do stuff and you're just not in your time. Your time might end up, and then like a couple of years after it's over, your time might suddenly be there. And there's no way you could have known that. Like, oh, if it happened now, maybe people would be more interested in whatever it was that we were trying to do. I mean, that's happened a handful.
Well, exactly. But I think and I stand by everything that band did, as does everyone else. But like, and we worked really hard, but it just didn't really matter that much. But that's kind of where I had the germ of the idea for Conan Neutron, The Secret Friends, which was literally just, I saw an awesome show by a band I love, they're friends with, called Nonagon. And it's got really inspiring. I was at this thing where I saw all my friends like doing rad stuff. And I'm like, everyone's digging deeper, finding more of what makes themselves them. And just, it was really inspiring. Like I wasn't like jealous or pissed off by it. I was really inspired by it. Like, well, I got this time now. I'm kind of learning how to like write songs on my own again, or rather picking that up from when I used to do that in the, with this shitty drum machine with the Heavenly Creatures demo. And that's when I hit up Toshi and was like, hey, because he recorded the last VNA record, the last Victory and Associates record. And it was great. I think that's my favorite record that he did. And it was the perfect culmination of like, hey, this is a band at the top of its game. And also nobody cares. But which is unfortunately common.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like we were like, oh, we didn't do our best work. We did, and it wasn't enough. It's fine. But I told him, I was like, hey, I got these songs. Do you want, would you be interested in like, do you think these are good enough, first of all? And would be interested in making a record with me on this? And he's like, yeah, I would. Like, these are great. I like this. And so, and I was like, okay, awesome. Because like, I really like the songs. I thought the songs were interesting and worth exploring.
Yeah.
And then, like, okay, well, if this is going to be like people playing in a room like a proper band, let's put something together. And luckily, I know a million people. I know even more now. Even back then, I knew a million people. It's like there's plenty of people I could call on to do this, and most of them, probably would say yes. But I was like, I didn't want to go with someone that I had played with for years, or that I had known for years. What I was thinking about is like, well, a band is as good as its drummer. And I've always thought,
I wonder where this is going.
And so then I asked, one of the greatest living drummers of all time. And then my internal mindset was, when he says no, then I'll ask, so and so, and then when they say no, I'll ask. Like I had it down to like a list of like 12 people or so, just assuming everyone would be like, no way, man, come on, get out of here. what do you think this is? Get out of here. But yeah, Dale Crover said yes. Knock me over with a feather, and I was like, hey, yeah, I like these songs. It's cool. So let's do it. Okay. And so then I called my friend Tony Ash, who played in this band Trophy Wives, that we were label mates with, and that we toured a lot with. And I now, first of all, I mean, I know I'm biased, but one of the best rock bass players of our age, like just as far as a rock bass player, astoundingly good, like just like perfect, and like one of the sweetest, coolest dudes. And we're like of the same brain on so much stuff. Tony, you were on the AC/DC special with him.
Yeah.
And we agree on almost everything, and when we don't, it's like, okay, raw power versus Funhouse, and like we both have good, strong opinions. Well, I don't quite agree, but anyway, right. I call him up and I'm like, hey, do you want to record a record with me? I'm gonna record it with this guy Toshi, who were the last V&A record, and he's like, hell yes, I'm in. I'm like, cool. Dale Crover's playing drums. Make sure to practice. And then, then I hung up.
Yeah,
which is a Hall of Fame dick move, but that's the origin story. I feel like I've told that story so much, but it's still kind of interesting because I never take it for granted that this is what we do ever, and that like to have that act of faith, not just with Toshi, not just with Dale, but with Tony, to be like, yeah, man, like. We'll climb aboard this ship with you to go do. What are we doing? Great, let's go do it.
Sounds
like that's a lot to me. I mean, that's huge. And the whole thing, I never even envisioned there being a live band. But then it was like, oh, we figured it out. Like, wow, record's good. What are we gonna do? Oh, let's make a second record, make it better. Okay, and then slowly started bringing it in as a live band. And my whole thing with it, which is also influenced by some friends of ours, was that I don't ever want to have to say no to something because somebody can't do it. Like there were a couple big shows that my band previously, and even with Replicated, we had to say no to because like someone just couldn't do it or like didn't make it a priority or whatever, or they didn't think it was, though it was. And that always just got me. I was like, oh, I hate going off. So I never wanted to be able to have to say no to anything. So the way I decided the live band for Secret Friends would be, it's like, well, it's always going to be Tony. It's always going to be me. But we'll just get people that I know from just years and years of playing. They know we're dependable. They know we're great. They're awesome musicians. It's not always going to be the same. It's not always going to be different, but it's always going to be different, always the same. Like the music's always, it's going to bring out, like the set will be picked based upon who's playing with us.
Right.
And even though everyone brings their own thing to it, it will be ostensibly the same thing. And people are just going to have to freaking deal with it. And it confuses the living hell out of literally almost everyone. and I was at the same time looking to get out of the Bay Area just for a cost of living thing. And I was like, well, my band isn't even here anymore. So like, why am I really even here? And then Tony, at the same time, moved to Kenosha, Wisconsin. And I was like, well, hell, like we already were considering moving to Milwaukee because I just knew a lot of people and it was like a relatively cheap place to live. So great. And then henceforth, like it went from being like a band that can do a live show to being like, hey, we're touring all the time, within reason. When I say touring all the time, I mean on the level that we're at. It's not like we're hitting like the road like 9 months out of the year or something. I mean that like it's calculated.
You're being realistic with the situation that you're in, and you're taking advantage of it.
Absolutely. We did a lot of regional stuff. We completed a surprising amount of like, covered lots of areas in the US, but we would do it in runs that were sustainable for everyone involved. And that's where it brought in the fact that, hey, if somebody can't do, hey, we got a 10-week run, 10-day run that we're doing on the East Coast. Like, oh, I can't do that. Like, okay, cool. Go down the list, can you do this? Yeah. Okay. No. Okay. Can you do this? And so that's led to some interesting situations where I put together lineups that, maybe the first time they've actually played together in a room is when we all are getting together to practice, and they individually know the songs, but have never their people in the band at the same time, which is a trip for them, and has led to some very hilarious conversations. For me, I don't even think about it. I mean, a good example is Tony and I were driving to, I think it was Marquette, Michigan, and we never practiced with the two guys that were playing with us. We know them, and we played with them before, but but they learned the set. We didn't get a chance to do a practice, so we're at this show with like hundreds of people, and like, all right, let's just. I guess I feel like, like again, dime store Chuck Berry or something, where it's like, okay, but it worked out great because I only pick people that like do their homework and treat it seriously. Right? Nobody gets like asked into the band if they're not deadly serious about what they do. And I know that they're going to treat it with respect and that they're going to put the work in. And so because of that, Secret Friends as a live act has like, it confuses people. Oh, you kick so-and-so out of the band? No, they not really. I mean, they're in the band, but it's not really that isn't how it works. Yeah. But it's allowed us to tour this stuff out and traditionally, but in a very sustainable way.
I'm going to ask a couple more questions because I have to do laundry.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I do want to ask about your background for the new record. When the newest record came out, you went online and wrote this big thing about how the writing of this record was affected by, I don't want to say completely current events, but there's been a lot of isolation going on for the last year. A lot of I know that both of us from our various endeavors have talked to people where this obviously comes up, and not just specifically the pandemic, but just all the feelings it's brought, and just and how like mental illness and mental well-being is often this thing that's treated in this weird way. Like there's this big stigma attached to it that doesn't get the courtesy that other things that people can be affected by, whether it's drinking too much or eating lasagna every day for a year straight. And, it seemed like it was important for you to put out this message that this was kind of not trying to set up to be the theme, the one thing that you have to look at this record and address it, but it seemed like it was important for you to let people know that it was affected by some of those feelings brought on by maybe not necessarily the pandemic itself, but just the questions of being okay, going through stuff. And is that something, can I ask you to elaborate a little bit on that? So this is...
Yeah, happy to talk about it. Definitely. Okay. And to any level of detail that you like. So what you're talking about, the new record, which is called Dark Passengers, is I flat out say it's a concept record. And it's a concept record about depression, mental health, imposter complex, suicidal ideation.
Can you tell me what the imposter, is the imposter, I'm sorry for cutting you off, but I've heard the term imposter complex before. Is that when you think the jig is up and people are going to figure out that what you're doing is inferior, and that you're a fake and you're not going to ever get any more attention for what you do, and they're going to figure out that you're like a loser or whatever? Is that imposter syndrome?
I mean, that's a decent enough summation. Yeah. I mean, the idea is that it's something that happens within the mind where you feel that what you are doing is not up to par or inauthentic or not good or whatever. Yeah. And that you will be exposed, and that someone's going to be like, check this out. Look at this idiot. Like, this person doesn't have any talent. And it's not something that it just happens with creativity, but it happens, it happens with writers, happens with musicians, happens with anything creative.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But it happens, in professional services and things like that too. And it's actually relatively common. And I have pretty much suffered with that my entire life, amongst many other things. But the thing with me is that I'm able to acknowledge that that's there and acknowledge what it is and move past it. Just in the same way that, like, I am a manic depressive, but I'm a high functioning manic depressive. Right. I guess manic parts you got to worry about. but that's my thing, is that surprises people. It surprises people when I say that. And that I have, these fraudulent feelings and things along those lines. I'm like, well, I don't know why that would be surprising to you. Like,
yeah,
I'll win the cards publicly, but it's like, yeah, like this is, I'm a whole ass person, just like everyone.
Yeah, well, that's interesting to say that, because like part of being creative, whatever makes people creative, or to me, as somebody that's obsessively done the same thing over and over, is that for me it fills some sort of hole that is there that you're not really aware that there's a hole there. All you know is that you only feel complete and quote unquote normal when you do all that stuff. It turns into this compulsive thing. So I can understand people talking to you about some of those feelings and issues and being surprised, but I can't really imagine a lot of creative people being flabbergasted that you would say something.
It depends on I think the viewpoint of the person, right? I mean, and to speak to the earlier part of that sentence too, there's a line in one of the songs, make the music louder than the sadness and the doubt.
Sure.
Do it with reckless force. And I really like that line. I think that's maybe As a Cat. That's like one of my least favorite songs on the record, but not because I think it's a bad song. I just had I changed the key like right before we like recorded it and had to like redo the vocal. Like I just have bad memories attached to it, but it's got some of the best lines, unfortunately. But that's, people see the results. People see the results. And especially if there's the negative mark of you being a non-known commodity, people only see the results. So they're disinclined. Like we've been trained as a culture to automatically disavow and not like anything that we don't already know. Now, people ascribe this as like, a middle-aged dude thing, and it is a bit of a middle-aged dude thing, but really it happens with almost everyone that doesn't train their brain to be otherwise, because that's how we've been trained by all these companies and like by culture and so on and so on. And I think that, if somebody sees just this, what appears to the outside world, I guess, is this relentless output of, songs and albums and shows and podcasts and this and that and the other, they might be inclined to not think about that there's a human behind that, and that there's a human behind that deals with like real human things. And furthermore, might cast aspersions as to the quality of the thing. And it's all I can say is that I have like I think back to like the classic cartoons where we got like the devil on one side and you got the angel on the other side, and going back and forth about it.
Sure.
And some of the songs are kind of set up in such a way on this record that's sort of a conversation with those sort of entities. And I was trying to do it in such a way that would be relatable. And it's weird to like, it's going to sound weird. I wanted to write a record about depression and like all the various subsects and subgenres and of depression, but not have it sound depressing.
Right.
Like, and that's the thing that like, I love Black Heart Procession. Black Heart Procession is a great band. I wasn't trying to like sound like the first couple of Black Heart Procession records. You know what I mean? Like I wanted it to be more expansive. I wanted the songs to kind of develop and like have people immediately know. I mean, just from the record cover, it's like all the other record covers are kind of bright and cartoony looking, even when they're about more screwed up stuff. It's like
this is different. And it seemed like from what I gathered on, saying that you saw something online is not really a gauge for reality, but it seems like people kind of dug it.
Yeah, well, and so you brought up something a while ago that was interesting. That this record was conceived, written, recorded, mixed, all that way before COVID hit. And the original idea was that like, hey, after we get done from this first round of touring in March, we'll come back, get the record out, and then like, hit it as hard as we can, like late summer and fall for like these other things we had planned, right? And then it was like, hey, maybe we should wait until this COVID thing's over in a few weeks. And, like we kept pushing our plans back and back and back as it became clearer and clearer that the COVIDiots, as you have so eloquently termed them, we're going to make this be as prolonged as possible. Yes. And at a certain point I was like, well, you know what? Like, I think this record should just come out. And it's like, it should just come out and like, it'll hit the way it's going to hit. And that's going to be okay. And it's weird that like all this stuff was before all that, like, you know, pre-election anxiety and, you know, the isolation and loneliness people feel every day from being like in lockdown and not being able to do the things that they want to do. And it's like, I was worried this might be too much. But it's like, I feel like you get one shot at this. Like, to write about something this heavy, like, if you don't want to be like, oh, that's the guy that writes about depression shit. Okay. Like, you know, and don't get me wrong, you can make a career of it, I'm sure. But I'm going to get one shot to do this right. So I better freaking, and I labored on it. Like a lot of friend stuff, like the lessons that I learned from making records with Dale and Tony and Toshi is that a lot of times I would get in my own way. Like my first instincts were usually the best, you know, when in doubt, take it out. You know, like I had like all these like little like maxims that I learned from it, but not the least of which is sort of like hey, if I have something that's kind of banging around in my skull, explore it. And what I was thinking about was the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, so much of this stuff is just stigmatized. And why? Like everything's a little smaller when it's out. And like, it's not like I want to be like the guy that only sings about like depressing BS, but like, look, like you can do it in such a way that like, it's personal. This is maybe the only personal record that I've ever done. The fact I'm just like, it's all there, man. You can like read the lyric sheet and figure me out. Like I'm handing you over a record of my neurotic tendencies for better or for worse. And you just do whatever you want with it. Here's how my OCD manifests. Boom. You know, like literally line by line. You'd be like, okay, well, what is this? You know, what is this line? Well, it means this for me. But also in such a way that like, and this is one of the reasons I labored on it. I didn't want it to be just about me. Like there's one of my favorite singers, period, is Lindsay Charles from the Cell Phones, the excellent band, the Cell Phones. And she sings the third song. And first of all, that's just a joy because she's an amazing singer. And the Cell Phones are fantastic. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but I think I famously said it's like Tina Turner fronting No Means No. And I stand by that assessment. Like they're incredible.
That sounds like a good combination.
But she's such a compelling singer, and she's played with us a lot. And like, you know, when we've played together, she's like sung a couple songs with us. Like I kind of characterized her as the Mark Lanigan to our Queens of the Stone Age when that was happening. Like, you know, on some macro level, I was like, anytime she wants to come in, great, we'll suit the set to you. You know, but she sings this song Without the Poison. What am I? And the idea behind that is like, hey, there's all this stuff banging around your head, all these neuroses and psychosis and depression and whatnot. There's medication stuff for that. But if that changes the chemistry of who you are, does it change the creativity? And her and I had this deep conversation about this like years ago of just how scary that was. And it was like, if it takes away the spark of what makes you, is it worth it? So that's what that song's about. And for me, it was like, I wanted to have someone with different lived experience sing a song and come where they're coming from. And I couldn't think of anyone better to do it. Like it was, but I knew that like I wouldn't be able to let go enough to have it be like, hey, the whole record's every person. I'm like, no, I got plenty to say in here. But like the fact, and she was like, hey, do you want to write lyrics in this with me? I'm like, no, I want you to write the lyrics. I want you to do you. And it's important to me that you do it however you want to do it. And of course, she's astounding. So of course it's wonderful. And that was important to me. Here's where it all comes back around. That's where it was important to me because like, that's another voice, another lived experience to show that, oh, this isn't just like, hey, Conan's depressed. This is like, these are the plagues of our day. These are the battles of the mind that so many people go through.
Yeah.
And to have that articulated in such a way that, you know, hopefully it's thoughtful and kind of cool. It's weird. The two reactions to it seem to be nobody wants to say anything at all, or people just want to like give me like, you know, a freaking 6-page, like, you know, beautiful treatise on like what it made them feel. And
but that sounds great. That sounds great. Though. You can't put a price on that kind of reaction with something that you created. That's awesome.
I mean, when I'm going back to like me and like summer of 2018 or whatever, just like laboring on a line is this too much? Is this not enough? Is it any good? Oh, all this is terrible. Like just the idea that it has touched literally any human being in any way that deeply that's
success. It's like, because you're just trying to communicate, basically.
Exactly. And again, it's through my particular prism, and it's through largely my own lived experience. But I think it's something where also its songs are good. I mean, and there's a couple of hard bangers. There's a song on this record that sounds like Priest, like, and then that's the idea. Is like it shouldn't all sound like like mid-period Cure, as much as like I love that. Like it'd be inauthentic to try to like musically change up that much, but it is more expansive. You know? And like for people that only are interested because for whatever reason that second record is like that's the most popular, people still keep coming back to it. Hey, I'm happy anyone listens to anything at all. I love that record too. Right. But if you only want that record, this probably isn't the record for you, but you might like a couple of the songs on it. And that's, you know what, if you don't care about literally any of this, it's still there. Hopefully it's still enjoyable, but I had to do it. I don't know if I can put it any other way. I had to do it. And I knew I had one shot to get it right. Considering the amount of output the Secret Friends has done, like, I don't really have any major quibbles. I got like 2 minor quibbles out of like 3 full-length records and a singles compilation. Like, 6+ years of work with like more on the way soon. I'm like, look, love it, hate it, or ignore it completely. Like, it's what I want it to be. And like, I had someone, like I said, that like, and it's all the salty old punk rockers that I talked to are all like, this is the most Conan thing that's ever happened. I'm like, it's a good thing my name's on the masthead, huh?